"You're done here, Pendleton. Hand over your port credentials and clear out." Bradley sneered, tossing a cardboard box onto my desk. I quietly packed my personal belongings, knowing that the moment my feet left this building, the entire supply chain of this $180 million logistics giant would freeze at the port. They thought they were firing a compliance manager. They didn't realize they were revoking the key that unlocked every single cargo container entering the United States. For 15 years, my life was defined by the rhythmic clanging of container cranes and the heavy scent of diesel fuel drifting off the Pacific at the port of Long Beach. My name is Arthur Pendleton. At 48 years old, I served as the Director of Customs Compliance and Lead Customs Broker of Record for Vanguard Logistics Solutions, or VLS. I built their compliance department from the ground up, starting back in 2011, when the company was just a regional drayage carrier with a dozen trucks and a small warehouse near the 710 freeway. Under the leadership of the founder, Richard Vance, we grew into an international logistics powerhouse. Richard was a logistics man of the old school, someone who understood that in this industry, reputation and regulatory compliance are the bedrock of survival. We managed the end-to-end supply chain for several major retail conglomerates, the largest of which was Apex Retail Group, a multi-billion-dollar retail empire. Our contract with Apex alone was worth $45 million annually, representing 40% of our container volume. Every single week, VLS cleared approximately 400 cargo containers through the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles. These containers held everything from high-value consumer electronics to perishable goods destined for Midwest distribution centers. The logistical coordination required to keep this volume moving without delay is staggering. It involves filing thousands of import entries, submitting CBP Form 3461 for immediate delivery, and CBP Form 7501 for entry summaries, all while coordinating with ocean carriers, terminal operators, and drayage truck fleets. To make this happen, I spent my early mornings walking the docks of Terminal T, observing the massive blue gantry cranes unloading cargo from giant post-Panamax vessels, ensuring that our terminal operations matched the paperwork filed in our offices. But the absolute core of this entire operation was something highly technical and legally rigid: the Customs Filer Code and the Customs Power of Attorney. Under federal maritime law, specifically Title 19 of the Code of Federal Regulations, a corporation cannot act as a customs broker or clear commercial cargo entering the United States unless it holds a valid corporate broker permit. To hold that permit, the corporation must employ at least one individually licensed customs broker who is designated as the qualifying officer of the corporation. My customs broker license number 31824, was that legal anchor. In the eyes of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, I was the sole individual responsible for the active supervision and control of all customs transactions executed by VLS. My license was linked to VLS's filer code in the Automated Commercial Environment Portal, the federal network used to submit all import documentation. Furthermore, our $500,000 continuous import bond, which is a mandatory federal requirement to clear cargo, was tied to my broker license and backed by a personal guarantee that I had signed with the surety company. I arrived at my desk at 6:30 every morning, reviewing hazardous material manifests, verifying country of origin markings, and auditing tariff classifications. Logistics is a game of margins and minutes. A single day of delay at the port can result in demurrage charges of $150 per container. If a shipment of electronics gets held up by customs because of a paperwork error, the retail client faces empty shelves and VLS faces massive contract penalties. I took pride in the fact that under my watch, VLS never had a single container seized, never paid a major fine, and maintained an audit error rate of less than 0.1%. Richard Vance valued my work, paying me a base salary of $165,000 plus bonuses. I was also responsible for securing our CTPAT certification, which stood for Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism. This special federal status meant that our shipments were classified as low risk, allowing VLS cargo to bypass the time-consuming random physical inspections that delayed other logistics firms. But as Richard approached his 65th birthday, he decided to take a step back from daily operations. He remained the CEO, but he brought in his nephew, Bradley Vance, as the executive vice president of operations to transition into running the company. Bradley was 32, possessed an expensive MBA from an Ivy League school, and carried the arrogant confidence of someone who had never actually stood on a shipping dock in the freezing rain. He looked at my compliance department and didn't see an insurance policy against federal shutdown. He saw a costly roadblock that stood in the way of his quarterly bonuses. He believed that compliance was a collection of archaic rules that could easily be bypassed with enough speed and corporate pressure. Bradley's arrival marked the beginning of a quiet war. He immediately began looking for ways to cut costs and streamline operations, showing little regard for the regulatory framework that had kept the company safe for 2 decades. His first target was our customs brokerage fee structure. He believed that paying for a dedicated in-house compliance team and maintaining strict auditing procedures was a waste of resources. He wanted to outsource our customs filing to a cheap third-party logistics contractor based in Monterrey, Mexico, who promised to file entries for a fraction of the cost. He even presented a PowerPoint presentation to the board titled Operations Efficiency 2026, pointing out that my department cost $380,000 annually in salaries and software licensing. According to Bradley, outsourcing would save us $260 in a year, and he intended to collect a portion of those savings as an operations bonus. The real trouble started in May of 2026. We received a massive shipment of consumer electronics from Shenzhen for Apex Retail Group. The shipment consisted of 80 containers containing lithium-ion battery packs and high-end smart home devices. Because lithium-ion batteries are classified as Class 9 hazardous materials, they require extremely strict customs declarations, specialized hazmat shipping papers, and precise hazardous material manifests. The third-party contractor Bradley wanted to use had prepared the entry summaries, but when I audited their draft filings, I found dozens of critical errors. They had misclassified the battery chemistry under the harmonized tariff schedule, which would have allowed VLS to avoid paying a specific environmental fee but constituted federal misdeclaration and customs fraud. I walked into Bradley's glass-walled office with the printed drafts, pointing out the discrepancies. Bradley was sitting behind his desk, scrolling through spreadsheets on his tablet. He didn't look up when I sat down. "Bradley, these Shenzhen entries are completely wrong," I said, setting the papers on his desk. "The third-party firm classified these lithium batteries under a general electronics code. If CBP audits this shipment at the port, they will seize the entire 80 containers, fine VLS up to $10,000 per violation, and potentially audit our entire history of imports. We need to refile these under the correct tariff code and pay the proper duties." Bradley finally looked up, his expression one of pure annoyance. "Arthur, you compliance guys always see a crisis in every shadow," he scoffed. "The Monterrey firm does this for hundreds of importers. They know what they are doing. Refiling this will delay the shipment by 3 days and cost us an extra $42. Nelson in duties. Apex needs these electronics in their Chicago warehouse by Friday. If we delay, we violate our service level agreement, and we pay a penalty. I am not delaying a multi-million-dollar shipment over a minor paperwork technicality." "It is not a technicality, Bradley," I countered, keeping my voice level. "It is a federal law under 19 U.S.C. Section 1592, which covers penalties for fraud, gross negligence, and negligence. The Monterrey firm doesn't have U.S. licensed brokers on site. They route their filings through a shell broker in El Paso. If the port authorities inspect these containers and find hazardous lithium batteries declared as standard plastic cases, VLS faces immediate cargo seizure. My name and my personal customs broker license are attached to these filings. If CBP finds out we knowingly misclassified hazardous materials to save on duties, I am the one who faces personal civil penalties and the potential revocation of my broker license." "I am not signing off on these entries." Bradley stood up, leaning over his desk. "Arthur, you work for VLS. Your job is to facilitate our shipments, not act as a federal agent. I want these entries submitted as they are now." I stood up to meet his gaze. "Then you can find someone else to file them," I said calmly. "As the qualifying broker of record, I have the legal authority to block any filing that violates federal law. I will not authorize the customs power of attorney to execute these entries. Bradley's face flushed with anger. He didn't say another word. He dismissed me with a wave of his hand. The next morning, he called an emergency meeting of the operations board, including his uncle, Richard. During the meeting, Bradley presented a distorted picture, accusing me of insubordination, delaying critical shipments, and costing the company money through unnecessary compliance bottlenecks. Richard looked tired and remained silent, letting his nephew take the reins. Bradley looked at me across the boardroom table, a smug smile on his face. "Arthur, you are no longer aligned with the operational goals of this company," he announced. "Your services are no longer required. You are terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you to your desk to pack your things, and you will hand over your port credentials before you leave." I looked at Richard, but he looked away, unable to meet my eyes. He was dealing with cardiovascular issues and was eager to avoid conflict, choosing to trust his family member instead of the compliance officer who had protected him for 15 years. I turned back to Bradley, maintaining a calm, expressionless face. "Understood," I said. I stood up, walked out of the boardroom with the security guards behind me, and packed my desk. Bradley stood by my office door, watching me like a warden, eager to see me break. But I didn't break. I knew the regulations better than he ever would, and I knew exactly what my termination meant for Vanguard Logistics Solutions. I walked out into the corridor, handed my physical ID badge to the security guards, and left the building in absolute silence. I walked out of the VLS corporate headquarters carrying a single cardboard box, the hot afternoon sun beating down on the asphalt of the parking lot. I put the box in the trunk of my car, climbed into the driver's seat, and sat in the quiet air conditioning. I wasn't angry, I was focused. I opened my laptop and connected it to my phone's cellular hotspot. It was time to activate the mechanism that Bradley Vance's expensive business education had failed to account for. Under 19 CFR 11145, when an individually licensed customs broker, who is the sole qualifying officer for a corporate customs permit, is terminated or resigns, the corporation's permit is suspended by operation of law. The regulation states that the corporation has 120 days to employ another licensed broker, but during that period they cannot execute any customs business unless they have another licensed officer on staff. VLS had exactly 0 other licensed brokers. They had plenty of compliance clerks and operations managers, but none of them held an active license from the U.S. Department of the Treasury. I logged into the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Automated Commercial Environment Portal using my personal digital credentials. I cleared the multi-factor authentication screen and navigated to the Broker License Association page. I entered VLS's employer identification number and filer code, then formally submitted a notice of disassociation, stating that effective July 21, 2026 at 1:40 p.m. Arthur Pendleton, license number 31824, was no longer associated with Vanguard Logistics Solutions, filer code 51K. Next, I opened a pre-drafted email template on my desktop. It was addressed to the underwriting department of Great American Surety Company, the firm that issued VLS's $500,000 continuous import bond. As the broker of record, I had personally co-signed the indemnity agreement for that bond, guaranteeing the company's compliance with customs regulations. I attached my termination letter, signed by Bradley, and formally notified the surety company that I was withdrawing my personal guarantee and requesting the immediate cancellation of the bond under 19 CFR paragraph 113.54. I knew Donald Sterling, the lead underwriter at Great American, very well. Within 10 minutes, Donald replied to my email. "Arthur, I am sorry to hear about this situation. Since you are no longer the qualifying broker of record for VLS, we cannot continue to underwrite their customs bond. I am issuing the formal cancellation notice to CBP immediately. Without an active continuous bond, VLS could not clear any imported goods without posting a single entry bond for every single container, a process that takes days and costs thousands of dollars per shipment." I hit send on both submissions. The digital gears of the federal government began to turn. Within minutes, the CBP database updated my status. The association between Arthur Pendleton and filer code 51K was dissolved. Because VLS had no other qualifying broker listed in the ACE system, the federal network automatically flagged the VLS filer code. The system did not wait. It automatically changed VLS's operating status to suspended. I closed my laptop, placed it on the passenger seat, and drove home. I spent the rest of the afternoon working in my garden, pulling weeds and trimming the tomato plants. I knew that by the next morning, the port operations at Long Beach would become an absolute nightmare for Bradley Vance, while I was enjoying the quiet of my backyard. VLS's evening shift was beginning to process the incoming manifests for the next day's arrivals. At the port of Long Beach, 3 container ships carrying cargo managed by VLS were already tying up at the berths. Among the thousands of containers on those ships were the 80 containers of electronics for Apex Retail Group, along with 320 other containers containing auto parts, textiles, and perishable food items for our other clients. The VLS night shift compliance clerks logged into the ACE portal to submit the customs entry filings. They typed in the container numbers, the tariff classifications, and clicked submit. Every single submission was instantly rejected by the federal portal. The red error message appeared on their screens. Suspended. No licensed broker of record. The night shift supervisor, a veteran clerk named Sarah, who had worked with me for 9 years, tried to override the error, but the system locked her out. She tried to submit the entries using the corporate importer ID, but the surety bond cancellation had already been processed, triggering another system rejection. Error. No active, continuous bond on file. Dented. Sarah knew exactly what this meant. She knew that VLS was legally dead in the eyes of U.S. Customs. She picked up her phone and dialed Bradley Vance's personal number at 2 a.m, but Bradley had his phone on silent, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the logistical disaster that was unfolding. By 7:30 Tuesday morning, the situation at the terminal had escalated from a minor bottleneck to a full-blown crisis. Drayage trucks hired by VLS were lining up at the port gates to pick up the containers that had been unloaded overnight. But when the truck drivers reached the terminal gates, the optical character recognition cameras scanned their license plates and the container numbers, and the system flagged them. Under maritime security laws, no container can leave the port terminal without an electronic customs release, known as a CBP Form 3461 release. VLS had no releases. The gate arms remained down, and the terminal operators turned the trucks away, forcing them to circle the block and park on the public streets. Within hours, over 100 VLS trucks were idling on the roads leading to the port, creating a massive traffic jam. Drivers like Hank, who had driven for VLS for 8 years, were stuck on Harbor Scenic Drive, blocking traffic and calling dispatch in a state of confusion. The Port Authority police arrived and began issuing tickets to VLS drivers for blocking public lanes. Demurrage charges at the port were accumulating rapidly. The terminal operators charged demurrage on a sliding scale. For the first 5 days, it was $150 per container per day. With 400 containers sitting on the docks, VLS was facing $60, zeroing in demurrage fees for the first 24 hours alone. If the cargo remained for more than 5 days, the fee would double to $300 per container, creating an astronomical financial liability. Worse, the supply chain director for Apex Retail Group, a demanding woman named Helen Ross, called Bradley's office. Bradley, who had finally arrived at work, answered the phone. "Bradley, our inventory tracking system shows that 80 containers of electronics are still sitting at the port of Long Beach," Helen said, her voice sharp. "They were supposed to be loaded onto trucks at 6 a.m. and arrive at our Chicago distribution center by Friday morning. If those containers do not leave the port by tonight, our retail stores will miss their weekend sales events. We have spent $5 million on a national marketing campaign for these new products. If we have empty shelves, VLS will be in breach of contract, and we will enforce the $250,000 daily penalty clause." "What is going on?" Bradley tried to reassure her, his voice shaking. "Helen, it is just a minor software glitch at the port," he lied. "Our team is working with customs now to resolve it. The cargo will be moving by this afternoon." As soon as he hung up, Bradley ran down to the compliance office. He found the staff in a state of panic, surrounded by stacks of paper and error messages. "Why aren't the entries going through?" he demanded, slamming his hand on a desk. Sarah, the supervisor, looked at him with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. Bradley, we can't file anything, she explained. The ACE system is rejecting every entry because Arthur is no longer listed as our qualifying broker. His license was the only one tied to our filer code, and to make it worse, our continuous import bond has been canceled because Arthur withdrew his guarantee. The company has no legal permit to clear customs. Then use the Monterey contractor, Bradley yelled. Put their filer code on the entries and submit them. We can't, Sarah said. Under federal regulations, a foreign contractor cannot use their license to clear VLS cargo unless we execute a new power of attorney, which must be signed by a licensed broker of record on our end. And even if we could, they don't have a customs bond set up for our importer ID. We are completely locked out. Bradley's face went pale. He finally realized the scope of the problem. He ran back to his office and dialed my personal cell phone. I was sitting on my back patio, drinking a fresh cup of coffee when my phone rang. I let it ring for 3 cycles before I answered. Arthur Pendleton, I said. Arthur, it's Bradley, he said, trying to sound commanding, but failing to hide the panic in his voice. We have a problem at the port. The entries for the Apex shipment are getting rejected by the system. I need you to log into your ACE account and approve the entries immediately. We are losing thousands of dollars every hour. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I'm sorry, Bradley, but I no longer work for VLS, I replied. As you made very clear yesterday, my services are no longer required. I have already submitted my disassociation notice to CBP and canceled my guarantee on the customs bond, as I am legally required to do upon termination. I have no authority to access VLS's filer code anymore. Arthur, you can't do this, Bradley shouted. This is sabotage. You are destroying this company. We will sue you for everything you have. It's not sabotage, Bradley. It's compliance, I said calmly. Under 19 CFR Section 111.45, VLS is prohibited from conducting customs business without a licensed broker of record. You chose to terminate the only licensed broker on your payroll. The federal government suspended your permit, not me. If you want to sue me for complying with federal law, go ahead. My lawyers will enjoy the deposition. I hung up the phone. 2 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Richard Vance's name. I let the phone ring, taking another slow sip of my coffee, letting the weight of the situation sink in at VLS headquarters. I answered the phone on the first ring. Arthur, please tell me we can fix this, Richard said, his voice sounding older and more tired than ever. The board just notified me that Apex is threatening to cancel the entire contract. If we lose Apex and have to pay the demurrage fees, VLS will face bankruptcy within the month. How did this happen? Richard, your nephew fired the only licensed customs broker. VLS had, I explained quietly. He wanted to bypass compliance to save a few $1,000s in fees. The federal government suspended VLS's customs permit because you no longer have a qualifying officer. The continuous bond is canceled because I cannot legally guarantee transactions for a company that terminated me. Richard sighed deeply, a long silence on the line. I understand, Arthur. I made a mistake letting Bradley take over operations. He didn't understand what you did here. What will it take to get you back and get the cargo moving? I had prepared my terms and I delivered them without hesitation. First, VLS must pay me a lump sum severance package of $350,000 for wrongful termination, tax-free. Second, I will return as a consultant for exactly 12 months at a rate of $25,000 per month, paid in advance at the start of each month. During this period, my only responsibility will be to serve as the qualifying broker of record for VLS's permit while you recruit a permanent licensed replacement. I will not report to Bradley Vance. In fact, my third condition is that Bradley Vance must be terminated from VLS immediately for gross negligence and violating company policy. Lastly, the company must issue a formal, written apology signed by the board. Richard hesitated. Arthur, Bradley is my family. Then VLS can find another licensed broker, I said. But as you know, it takes CBP at least 90 days to process a new qualifying broker application. By that time, Apex will be gone, VLS will owe millions in demurrage fees and contract penalties, and the company will be insolvent. You have to decide if protecting Bradley's pride is worth the survival of your life's work. Richard was silent for a long time. I'll call you back in 1 hour, he finally said. Exactly 55 minutes later, Richard called back. The board has approved all your terms, he said, his voice flat. Bradley has been terminated. The board is drafting the formal apology, and the settlement agreement is being sent to your attorney now. Once you sign and confirm receipt of the wire transfer for the severance and the first month's consulting fee, I need you to clear the port. I called my attorney, who confirmed that the paperwork was solid and the wire transfer of $375,000 had already cleared my bank account. I signed the contract and logged back into the CBP ACE portal. I submitted the paperwork to reassociate my license with VLS's filer code on a temporary consulting basis. I also contacted Great American Surety Company, reinstating my guarantee on VLS's continuous import bond for the duration of my consulting agreement. By Tuesday afternoon, the federal system updated VLS's status back to active. Sarah and the compliance team immediately submitted the entries for the 400 containers. The CBP system approved the entries within minutes, sending the electronic releases to the terminal gates. The drayage trucks began rolling out of the port, carrying Apex's electronics and the other clients' cargo toward their destinations. The logistics chain was moving once again. Bradley Vance was escorted out of the building by the same security guards he had used to escort me out the day before. He was blacklisted from the logistics industry, his reputation ruined by his own arrogance and ignorance of the laws that govern the supply chain. I returned to the VLS office the following Monday, not as an employee, but as an independent consultant. I sat in my old office, looking out toward the shipping docks, a quiet sense of satisfaction washing over me. I had built the system, and when they tried to cast me aside, they realized that the system could not function without the person who held the keys. In the high-stakes world of international trade, compliance is not a barrier, it is the ultimate leverage.